When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Hi, welcome to Thinking Green. As most of you know, Election Day is about a month and a half away, November 5th. And so our shows for the next 6 weeks will be introducing the viewing public to some of the Green Party candidates this year. So today I'm joined by Paul Garlinghouse, who is the New Haven Green Party candidate for Registrar of Voters. So welcome to Southeast Connecticut,
Thank
Paul.
you. I feel very welcome. Thanks for inviting me to Southeast Connecticut. This is pretty exciting. I'm very happy to come and talk to you guys today.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk to our candidates as well. There aren't as many as I would have liked, but it's a good batch. So with Election Day on November 5th, it's not always easy to learn about the candidates. We recently saw the Connecticut Mirror had a list of candidates, and it's been updated, but the list started out and it was only Republicans and Democrats, with two exceptions. I think there was one independent party candidate for a federal office and one Green State Senate candidate among the dozens of candidates listed. So it's not that easy. It seems like since COVID, there are fewer debates and forums. So it's really harder than ever to learn about the candidates.
It really is. It's hard to learn about the candidates, and it's hard to learn about the parties. I mean, many people are unaware there even is a Green Party in Connecticut or a Green Party in New Haven or New London. I mean, they just don't know, and they don't make it easy to find out. I mean, in fairness to the Connecticut Mirror, maybe it was hard for even them to find out, although they probably should have made a bigger effort.
Yeah, some of the candidates had registered with, the various state registries, the Election Enforcement Commission, but they responded very quickly, which was great. But the Green Party has been around in both New Haven and New London for close to 25 years. And it's been quite active and had some Greens elected in both places.
Oh yeah, my alder in my ward when I used to live in East Rock was a Green. He was awesome. And at a certain point, we had 2 Green alders and 2 Republican alders, and the Republicans insisted they were the minority party, and we're like, come on, this is math. We both have the same number. And it's hard, because, like this year, as any year, when Greens have some success, the, majority party in New Haven, the Dems, they come pretty hard to try to squelch us out, and, they're bigger, and we're the little ones. But there is a lot of, just first generally, there's a lot of feeling that in your city, in your state, in the country, things are pretty bad and pretty wrong and pretty stacked against regular people, and that's not an illusion. And, we have elections that people don't participate in because, well, first of all, it's hard. And by the way, the last day to register online to vote the easy way is October 18th. And if you don't know for sure if you're registered, you should register now. You go to the website for the Secretary of State or just put in Connecticut vote or whatever, and you'll come to a place where you can easily confirm if you're registered, and if you're not registered, if you need to change it, you can do it online until October 18th. There is same-day registration, but that involves going down to City Hall, and a lot of people are busy and don't have time to do that. Because I ran for Registrar of Voters last time, And I did well enough for us to, get, 2 or 3% citywide, which makes us kind of an official party in New Haven. And I didn't have to go again this time and circulate those stupid petitions with all those signatures and all those certifications, which is the hurdle they put in front of any
Right. At least
third-party
not for
candidate.
the New Haven.
Right, at least not for New Haven registrar of voters.
Yeah.
But, the reason for wanting to be registrar of voters is first of all, when I have tried to participate as a candidate or as a voter and I've interacted with this Office of the Voter Registrar, it has not been user-friendly by any means. And I've gotten bad information, wrong information, inaccurate lists of voters in my district and stuff. And it's just not really acceptable. And people report it being a very intimidating, not user-friendly process. And this is the whole thing. If we're going to fix any of the huge problems that we have, people have to understand that yes, voting really does matter, but you have to do it, you have to participate, and you have to have a way of learning about the candidates and the issues and the options. And that's why I was so excited that you invited me to come today, because that's what we need to do. We need to let people know what's going on and that there are other options than the ones that they may have heard about.
And one of the interesting things about registrar is it really takes a skill in many areas. I mean, there is a lot of data management. The pay is usually not very good.
Yeah.
And the people who are in those positions are sometimes not exactly political appointees, but they are they're chosen to be candidates through a political process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, their job is administrative. It's not political
Right.
in theory.
Right, but at least in New Haven, and I think in most Connecticut towns, it's a Democrat and a Republican, if they can find someone from both parties. Sometimes there's just one Democrat or Republican in some smaller places. But at least in New Haven, the Democrat and Republican can't lose. That's the law. No matter how many votes, if they get one vote, they still get to, but I have to actually beat one of them to actually get elected to the office.
And in a lopsided town like New Haven, which probably has, 10 times as many registered Democrats as registered Republicans,
Oh, yeah.
the Greens have a little better chance than in other
Right.
towns, because my guess is if you got between 15 and 20% of the vote, you could
Sure.
become elected.
Yep.
And I guess it should be made clear that that doesn't mean the Republican loses.
No, the Republican doesn't need, neither of them need one vote. Well, they need one vote, I guess,
Yeah.
but not more than that. They can just vote for themselves. So I really need the votes to actually get to, hold the office. And, there's been a lot of obvious rumors and, suspicion and propaganda and just outright lies trying to cast suspicion on voting, that somehow people who aren't citizens are qualified or voting in massive numbers, which is definitely not happening. And the thing is about registrars of voters is we're local people who live in the community, and certainly having to go and petition, to get on for these offices. I mean, I've knocked on all the doors, right? And so I know the people, I know the voters, and they're people who are qualified to vote. But it's hard, because number 2 in New Haven is not Republican. Number 2 is unaffiliated or Green or some other kind of independent party. That's the number 2.
I think in the whole state of Connecticut,
Yeah.
there are probably maybe even more non-major party people than there are major party registered people.
Exactly, because people are not universally satisfied with either of these choices, and for good reason. I mean, if you look up close at them and get to know, you find a lot of flaws and things to make you unhappy about your choices.
Well, we were talking before the show started that you and I were both longtime Democrats.
Oh, sure.
In very democratic areas. I grew up in Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, I was born in New Jersey, and my dad was a Democratic town councilman and actually deputy mayor of Manalapan Township, New Jersey. And my first experiences was like 4 or 5 years old, riding in the motorcades how they used to do politics back then, throwing out candy and balloons and political buttons and pencils and all this kind of stuff to people. So, that's how I grew up. And, I was always, my dad, was a very progressive Democrat. We always, grew up with those kinds of values. My dad told me very early on, there's these developers who come in and they want to do these planned unit developments and all these zoning variances, and they're just ripping people off and they're just exploiting the community and foisting stuff on us for profit, and it's no good, and I've been against it. So I knew that from a very young age, and I was, those were the values that I was, committed to. I spent a lot of time in Austin, going to graduate school, and then finally graduating. And I became an activist there, primarily around a lot of the environmental and land use issues, and still, a registered, Democrat, and coming out and voting in all the elections, the local, and really participating. And we really made a difference. Voting really mattered, and you got a real sense of that. But it wasn't just voting. We signed up to talk at the city council meetings and the other kinds of meetings. There would be some committee about the Endangered Species Act, or some state panel that was trying to vote on whether there should be a low-level nuclear waste dump out in the middle of a desert community, to foist that problem on some, people who didn't have a lot of economic opportunities. And that's where I got all the hair, was going around doing that kind of activism. But, I was a delegate for Jerry Brown in the state convention in Houston that year, and they basically told us, shut up hippies, this is Clinton country, and that was kind of my real education, because as a progressive, I mean, there's a lot of great folks that I've admired and supported, and I really said, we're trying to move this Democratic Party more in line with our values and away from this sort of corporate neoliberal Clinton-esque stuff. And essentially it's been like, no way, Jose, shut up and get in line. And I think my heroes, the only real ones that I could really support, they've all been squelched or co-opted in that way. And at this point, then I say, look, there is a Green Party. It's been here for decades, and we can't really have much effect, I mean, on who's going to be president here in Connecticut, honestly.
Right.
I mean, it's a very lopsided sort of, vote when it comes to that. But there are tons and tons of local offices, and those things are kind of up for grabs if people can understand how to participate, not just as voters, which is what the voter registrar is trying to do. It's trying to make it easy and comfortable and fun and user-friendly for people to know how to register to vote. October 18th online, that's the best way to do it. Before then you can still register to vote in this November 5th election. And we also have early voting now, which we fought real hard for. Early voting starts on the 21st of October, and that's a more convenient way, because how many times have people gotten to say, it's, I don't know, 7 o'clock or something on election day,
Right.
and you remember you got so busy you didn't get a chance to go down
Right.
there. I can remember running to the polls, literally, blocks and blocks, to try to
And
get
early
there.
voting is about 2 weeks of voting, usually at town halls.
Right.
And
Centralized locations, not everywhere.
And it isn't the long 6 a.m. to 8 p.m.
No.
night, but it is 10 a.m. to 6 or 8 to 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's available, and it's a way to make sure you get your vote in, rather than waiting till the very last minute on election day, which happens to a lot of folks. And it's important that people know that that's available. It's something that was fought for many, many years, and we finally have it. And so folks should take advantage of that, because you don't want to have not 9 o'clock arrive on November 5th and realize you didn't vote.
Yeah.
Especially when, I mean, I think nearly every election, there's some really close races. Certainly, the presidential is going to be. But
One thing about early voting, though, it does put more work on the registrars
it
and
does.
voters.
It really does.
So I don't know if you've looked into it at all, how many towns are having trouble finding people who want the job, and and also towns where a third registrar would actually be a real help in that office.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in New Haven, we've had pretty much the same Democrat and Republican in that office for many, many, many years, and they seem happy. But New Haven's a bigger city, and I think the salary is concomitantly a little bigger. Some of these smaller towns, I mean, it's really like a stipend, and it is hard. And sometimes they only have one registrar from one of the two parties, the main parties. But people are not, for the most part, satisfied with only these two solutions. That's been a theme this election, the election before it was very much a theme. And that's why, one of the big issues that Greens have been pushing, with some success finally, is getting ranked choice voting, because then you can have many, many more options, and you can have this way of sorting through what people's real preferences are by ranking them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever they are. And then if nobody gets to 50%, if no one's that popular, then they start looking at the second choices, and they keep sorting through the list. And the idea is this whole spoiler effect that people are screaming about as they do every 4 years, when the Greens have the temerity to run a candidate with some name recognition for President of the United States. What an awful thing to do. That spoiler effect isn't a thing anymore.
And the spoiler effect argument is very odd to me, because if we look in presidential voting history in my lifetime, the one candidate that might have been a spoiler, and we will never really know, is Ross Perot, because he got he got 18 or 19% of the vote, and neither Clinton nor Bush that year had close to a majority. And the case could be made that Perot might have pulled more votes from George Herbert Walker. We'll never know. But one thing that was interesting, whether he spoiled or not, his platform did affect the Clinton years' economic program.
I've been as close to Ross Perot as I am to you right now, Rana, and that's a story that maybe isn't so relevant to today. But he was a billionaire goat rancher in Austin, to take advantage of farming exemptions on the land that he had bought out there. And we were at one of his events, and he canceled the Q&A after. They had only let loyal Peroistas into that and ask questions. So we waited by the obvious limos that were sitting in the driveway to ask him some questions. And I have to tell you, that guy looked scared. But, we were just harmless hippies. That's an example of, a very rich person who's kind of a megalomaniac and, was really in it, for his own aggrandizement. But the spoiler effect that they've been just really trying to skewer Greens with for a long, long time, because I love Ralph. I think Ralph has done so much for consumers, for people, for this country, done an amazing thing. I've always considered, Ralph a hero, and I've met Ralph a number of times. And I voted for Ralph. And so this thing is hung around his neck the same way they're doing with Jill Stein right now. And the thing is, there's a fundamental logical error, because most people don't vote. So how do you conclude that people who came out for Ralph or came out for Jill would have otherwise voted for the Democrat? You can't assume that, when staying home or leaving that blank is a very easy option.
Well, you'll be happy to know that we've went in New London to an executive elected mayor system in 2011. And we've had 4 mayoral elections since then. And the most recent one last year, well, that was a little bit of an aberration. But in 2011, we had 6 candidates on the ballot for mayor. We had the Democrat and the Republican. We had a very strong write-in candidate who had been the endorsed Democrat, but who lost his primary. Oh. And 3 petitioning candidates. We didn't actually have a Green. And the voter turnout was something like 4,800 voters. Yeah. Okay, 4 years later, there was only a Democrat and a Republican. The turnout was like 3,250.
Exactly.
And in that first year, the number of people who voted for the Democrat or Republican was 3,250. 4 years later, in 2019, there were 3 candidates. We had Frida Berrigan running. Well, it was she ended up running as a write-in, but everyone knew she was the Green Party candidate.
Right.
And there were like 3,600.
Yeah.
So every one of those elections, the number of people who voted either for the Democrat or the Republican was the same within like 10 or 12 votes. It was almost exactly 3,250.
Right.
And each additional candidate drove more turnout.
You're right. And that's the thing about the Green candidates. It's a very optimistic and positive option for people. I mean, it's for peace and it's for the planet and for people. You know, we're trying to have a government run for people, which would be really good. And by the way,
I think that would be a conservative concept, not a radical one.
Well, the thing is, you know, in the system that exists, the one we're actually living in, somehow legally, fictionally, corporations, fictive entities are people, and that's not the people I'm talking about. But those are the people who the other two parties are really run for. And the Greens really come out and say, no, we're Foursquare for real, living, breathing, working people. Okay, you know, mothers, fathers, you know, students, you know, people who don't vote, busy working parents. Students, you know, kids around college age, they massively do not come out to vote because, for one thing, in this economy, they're working as hard as they can, multiple jobs, just to stay alive and pay rent. I mean, New Haven, where I live, is like the 3rd least affordable city in the country, which is shocking. But and so when people realize that they do have another choice, you know, they feel like, you know, hey, you know, this is our only way, is to try to have a different option. And the ones who are in charge, the ones who are, you know, serving these corporate people, they really come down and try to squelch us out as hard as they can in 150 ways. So that's why I said, hey, you know, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to try to let people know that they have an option, and that it's not just one or two, you know, major parties that are, you know, the green one, the blue one and the red one. You know, that's not what it is. And
in our towns, it's both of our towns. It's really mostly just the blue one.
It's just the blue one.
I was going to say maybe it's a good time for you to talk about some of your professional life in New London, and you know, your day job, and how that relates to why you want to do what you're doing.
Well, I've lived in New Haven about 25 years, and it's a great city. And we've raised, you know, 2 kids there. They went to New Haven public schools their whole time, and it's an awesome city. It's got pretty decent public transportation, which my kids have used. Neither of them has a driver's license yet because, you know, they've always gotten around on their bicycles and public transportation, and mom and dad driving them. Be real.
Sometimes,
yes. And it's a fabulous city, and I really love it. And also, that's where I first, you know, voted, you know, for a Green alder who won, you know. And this is the thing, you know, Greens in my town and in your town have been able to actually get enough support to actually win offices and really, you know, build that kind of, you know, power and support, which is fantastic because at least in New Haven, no Republican is going to be an alternative to the single party that runs that entire government. But Greens can be and have been and will be again. And my whole thing is, don't just register to vote and participate and come out early to make sure your vote gets counted, but find out how easy it could be to be a candidate, and we'll help you and we'll support you and sort of nurture you, and you can benefit from all the hard lessons. You know, we've learned banging our fists against doors and our heads against barriers because it should be commonplace. These single candidate races, that's not democracy. And the candidates should really have different views. It shouldn't be just 2 candidates with essentially the same basic policies. It should be someone who really is different, and the Greens are different.
Yeah, I think we are, and in places like New Haven and New London, I feel as though, you know, the Greens could be the number 2 party.
Yes.
We'd be a very long way from being the number 1 party, but to be the number 2 party, I think we address some of the things that the Democrats don't do as well, better than the Republicans address those issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just, I mean, most recently, I ran for alder in my ward, which is in the Fairhaven Heights area of New Haven, and I polled far ahead of the Republican. The Republican basically had the street she lived on in terms of support, and I even got a lot of Republicans that I canvassed door to door to come out and vote for me. And I gave a very entrenched alder who's been there 20 years a very hard race, and scared them, which is also important because though I did not win, I certainly made our sort of not very active alder get a lot more active in terms of coming out to public meetings, actually finally agreed to a debate or a candidate forum the day before the election. And it was funny because it was sort of last minute, and it was she had a lot of her supporters on there to come grill me and try to rake me over the coals and call me a carpetbagger for moving across the river and all these sort of things. But it was interesting. The moderator asked a question because we have an airport expansion that's pretty controversial in New Haven, the Tweed Airport, and the moderator asked one of the other candidates, would you care to tell us your position on the Tweed Airport expansion? To which she replied, no, which was so funny because, if there's only one candidate, you can get away with that because you can refuse to answer a question that is extremely important to your voters. But you couldn't because I said, well, I will tell you my position on the airport because I think we owe it to the voters to make it very clear because this is an issue that really matters to people. And
yeah, the people in that neighborhood are very impacted by the expansion.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I know that in my ward, in my town, among my close friends, and there's people who believe both ways. And when you have an issue like that, you have to come down and make a stand. And as a Green, I said, look, I understand why people want to have a bigger, better airport. It seems like it would be a boon to the city, but you have to consider this particular airport is in a swamp next to the water. It already floods quite a lot. And one of the things that contributes to global warming big time is flying around on airplanes. So in the future, I have a feeling that we're going to be doing a lot less flying around on airplanes, and a lot of coastal places, including that expanded or not expanded airport, are going to be underwater a lot of the time. So ultimately, the impact on the neighborhood, which happens today and tomorrow and right now to real people who live there, is not worth the maybe this is going to be some great boon. And that's the thing. And that's why the Greens are different. And that's why I've been fully converted to Green, because what I hear from the Dems is, well, this is economic and all this kind of stuff. And that's what the Democratic alders have done in my town. But the thing is, over and over again, whether you talk about the stupid nuclear plant that is a millstone around our necks and our electric bills.
And owned by Dominion.
Exactly.
What a pair of names.
Yeah, some sort of horrible mega. That was sold as some sort of green alternative and too cheap to meter and all of that complete lies and propaganda. And once again, that was enriching private corporate jerks, okay? And these airport expansions and things, this is money that's being dumped in the pockets of private corporate jerks. And that's what the reality is. And as a Green, I'm saying no. We prioritize people. We prioritize the planet, which people are a part of.
Well, and it isn't just the public money, being privatized, but it's by the big corporate entities.
Yeah.
I kind of, I grew up in the 70s. I was an adult in the 70s, and I've often had the sense that we knew about climate change, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But I always had the sense that nuclear power, as it's been developed, sort of got more research money, got more favor than wind or solar, because it was so centralized that someone could make a lot of money.
Right.
If there were a decentralized nuclear solution, it would not have been nearly as attractive.
Right. It's the Tennessee Valley Authority and these other types of enormous and extremely politically powerful entities that benefit from these boondoggles. And the thing about it, because my dad's an engineer, okay, he's retired now, but he was trained as an engineer, and he's a smart guy. And I look up to him, and he said, look, as an engineer, this is what I think. I think that, in theory, you could make nuclear power safe. In theory, as an engineer, you can do the math and you can make it safe. The problem is, if you really do all those things, everything that's necessary, it is too expensive. And it's just stupidly expensive. And that's why they've shoved the costs onto the taxpayers. Ultimately, a big disaster that's borne by the taxpayers. And that's why when I drove way out to the desert in Texas to oppose this low-level nuclear dump, I said, look, this is just another way of trying to shift these costs onto somebody else. The risks of this contamination in the water or whatever, it's going to be on some poor people in the middle of the desert town in Texas.
Well, and even the uranium mining impacts a
Americans,
lot of
yeah.
Native Americans in
Absolutely.
the Midwest.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, for them, it does not feel like clean energy.
Not at all, not at all. And that's another thing that, obviously the major parties are already trying to push, these new plans that, these new nuclear power plants are going to be so much better, and we have to do it for climate change, and it's just not true. It's being pushed because that's what enriches big private corporations. Solar, you can put on the roof of your house, you can put it on the roof of your car. You can have a little solar battery power charger to take with you camping. Wind, same thing, decentralized. There's a big old windmill in New Haven that I love to see. These are actual clean energy solutions, and they are what should be prioritized.
And towns could put them on over every parking lot.
Absolutely. And yes, every
municipal buildings.
It would shade the parking lot, or covered bike lanes that are just covered with solar power generators on the roof. I mean, the possibilities are endless, but these things aren't happening as fast or as thickly as they should because we have, politicians at all these levels who are really owned and dominated by corporations and aren't really looking out for people. And that's what the Green Party, I think more than anything, that's what the Green Party is bringing to the table, and that's what people are saying, hey, that's what I believe, I want to vote for a Green.
And I do think the Green Party has a more long-term view. Future focus was one of the 10 values, and more, I think, as government is being run more on a business model, elected officials are looking at how are things going to look the next quarter, the next year, from now to the next election.
Right. Profits this quarter.
But not really looking at how are we going to be resilient as a coastal town in a time of climate change, or if, we stop getting, in New London, we stop getting contracts for 2 subs a year or 3 subs a year, and what's the economy going to look like?
Right,
And
exactly.
I don't know, we have a huge arts community, and I know New Haven does as well, and those small individualized things can adapt a lot easier than being a company town, even if what we were making was something that was fantastic for the planet. Being a company town is not a very resilient economic plan.
No, tons of communities that have tied themselves to a single industry like that. I mean, it's always a gold rush. You have a boom, and then you're a ghost town. Then you're deserted. Then you're just a dying, rust belt. And this is super important because, there's all kinds of economic opportunity in these smaller, decentralized kind of model than these, corporate top-down where they can outsource as much as possible, to the cheapest, global, provider of whatever it is that they're trying to do. And you know, I think New Haven's a great example of that. You know, both my kids are artists; they're in their 20s. My youngest is going to Gateway Community College right now, taking a lot of art and sculpture classes, and that's fantastic. And you know, he's really, you know, getting a lot, and he gets around either on the bus or his electric bicycle that you know, he bought himself and picked out himself. And you know, I was riding back from court on my bicycle because I'm an attorney. That's my job. I've been living in New Haven since I was in law school, my second year of law school, and I run for a lot of buses there, trying to get down to the train, to get to the subway, to get to Queens, to get to my law school. But you know, and I see him coming the other way, going to college with his helmet on, which I was so pleased to see. And you know, we really have. I mean, we have some good things in New Haven. It's a very livable place. It's got. And one of the greatest things, you know, is that Metro North and Shoreline station. Yeah. That comes right into New Haven. So it connects us up here to you guys in the Shoreline. It connects us all the way down to Manhattan on the Metro North. And of course, Amtrak as well, if you're willing to pay a lot of money and wait a little bit. But you know, that's one of the things. And those sort of really sort of people-centered kinds of infrastructure are what, you know, Greens are supporting all over the place, including, you know, here in New Haven and New London.
But you mentioned that New Haven was recently listed as one of the most expensive cities in the country, and even with that being a kind of a transportation hub and having, you know, pretty real vibrant neighborhoods and having a lot of good things, it seems kind of astounding to me that would be the case, that it would be that high. So
yeah. How did that happen?
Yeah, and this might be more like what you were talking about when you were running for Alder last year, but what's happening?
Well, I mean, personally, I've seen how my rent went up and up and up. You know, and eventually I have a condo that I rent and bought by an investor, you know, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, in New Haven in particular, you know, we have this huge problem with these giant sort of corporate slumlords, you know, who buy things, who invest in them the least amount possible, just, you know, a coat of paint and, you know, screw the doorknob back in place, and then they turn around and rent it and not maintaining these units, but charging a whole lot of money and sort of pricing, you know, people out of neighborhoods. I mean, I live in Fairhaven, which is, you know, there's, you know, lower rent options, but they've been climbing at this astronomical rate, and it's the rents as well as other inflation, but the rents have really been killing people. And you know, we do have a fair rent commission, but primarily there needs to be something more structural done, something much more widespread, something much more policy driven, so that it's not just a bunch of out of town, out of state, out of country investors who are just scooping all these profits in and taking all these rents and really harming, you know, communities. And then also, you know, of course, we're home to Yale University, which is great in many ways. I mean, you can't argue that there's been a lot of benefits to the city of New Haven from Yale, but they also take, you know, they have tax-free stuff and status and all that at a lot of their basic core real estate. And, you know, the sort of catering to these kind of, you know, more wealthy sort of, you know, young urban professional or you know, tech-oriented, you know, folks to come in and live in downtown New Haven and close to the city center and close to that wonderful railway hub and everything. You know, a lot of expensive places are being built, much more than affordable places are being built, and that's
I'm
a
thinking
problem.
a lot of the expensive places might be mostly studios and one-bedrooms and not family-size units.
It's not.
We're
oriented to
seeing that
families,
also in New London with the employees for Electric Boat.
Yeah.
That I mean, I guess, you know, to me it looks like the fundamental problem is that housing has become a commodity.
Yeah, yeah.
And there could be ways to deal with it. I've heard about cities that say that when a landlord decides to sell, giving their tenants the right of first refusal would be required. And I wouldn't say every group of tenants would be able to put together a reasonable offer,
Right.
but it would be nice to have that opportunity.
We do have some good things in New Haven that I think really need to be expanded. We have a public housing authority, of course. And in particular, in my neighborhood, there was this really troubled housing project that was torn to the ground, and part of it's a brownfield, and they haven't been able to build anything there yet. But they replaced them with a couple of different kinds of models. But one of them that I thought was fantastic, because I met a lot of these folks when I was out, petitioning and getting my signatures, is they made these fourplexes, these very nice fourplexes. And the deal is a person buys them and lives in one of the four, and then rents out the other three, maybe to in-laws, maybe to friends, but to whoever they choose. And then they pay their mortgage basically with the three rents. And these are stable because people have a built-in way to pay their mortgage, and they're also often very close to their tenants. They may be related to them.
Sure.
And so there's a real incentive to actually get the rents. They collect their rents. They're not having to evict people and stuff. And they have an investment in keeping their property and their neighborhood nice. And that's pretty simple. But it requires policy, it requires rules, it requires laws, and it requires political leadership to make that more the model than, Mandy Management is the one that people throw around. But there's a lot of other lesser known names in New Haven that are really exploiting and sucking the blood out of our communities, especially the community that I live in. And they should be reined in.
Yeah, and I think it's, the city and the state have the authority that they could make rules to rein them in.
There's tons of things. I mean,
so now you can be your lawyer self and say, what kind of things could be done?
Well, I mean, for example, New York City had rent control, and I think we've gotten to a point, in New Haven at least, given that it's third least affordable, that at least for some period of time, a much more vigorous form of rent control, not just the Fair Rent Commission, who basically, I've met some of those commissioners, and they're actually, pretty dedicated, public-minded folks for the most part. But their power's fairly limited. Someone has to actually know how to bring a complaint, which is not super easy. And, they can just evaluate a rent, and they have a formula, was this an excessive rent? But, if you want to really bring rents down, you have to build things, first of all, which they are doing. They've just bought a piece of property that a developer never manage to make anything out of, and that's in my neighborhood, and they're going to make something there. And, of course, we're all looking carefully to see that they make something good there and not something just, unaffordable there or out of scale with the size of the community and the buildings, because I do live in and near a kind of historic part of the city.
Now, does New Haven have form-based code for zoning, or?
We have zoning.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission here.
I'm not running for that.
Yeah, it's not elected, so it's appointed, and that, unlike the elected positions, they do need to have a mix of people from other political parties.
They really do, and in fact, I've been appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the Board of Alders to be on the Greater New Haven Transit District as a green, because they didn't have any greens, and that's been really good because they cut off our bus service going over the bridge from where I live downtown, and there was no real public input into it, and we're now organizing the community and trying to get them to fix that, and that's representation, and a lot of these boards and commissions are very empty of real sort of public representation. And that's a real way that people don't know about, and something I've been really encouraging is for folks to get involved with these boards and commissions, especially if they're all interested in being a green, because, and he said, we can't find Green Party people to submit their application for these boards. And I said, well, I'll do what I can to find some, but I have an application pending, Mr. Mayor. And yes, he did, to his credit, approve it, and I got confirmed and everything. So that's pretty important. That's pretty important. And yes, you have to have a lot of knowledge and technical expertise to really be effective as a planning and zoning commission, and I don't pretend to that. But I did take training in the registrar of voters office because as a serious candidate, I'm trying to prepare myself with the knowledge to get, the certification to know, the rules and how to run an election, or in this case, help two other, Republican and Democrat run an election. And that's important because there's a lot of technical sort of processes and rules, and also what goes wrong if the voting machine malfunctions, and what do you do if someone shows up and they're not on the voter rolls? Because I had two ladies show up to vote for me for Alder last November, and they had been purged from the rolls, and they didn't know why. And I said, oh, it's okay, you can go downtown and you can vote there. They said, we just took this time off from work to come and vote in the morning. We don't have time to now also go
and
downtown.
Do the election day registration thing.
Yeah. And so, those kinds of things are super important. They're super important. And that's why I think it would really be a benefit to those, 40-some% of New Haveners who are not a Democrat or Republican, to have someone really that isn't invested in one of those two major parties, keeping an eye on the election process and trying to make sure things run correctly, and also honestly, that someone's paying attention who isn't just a D or an R. And that's what people have a chance to vote for, because we have, and this really pleases me, because when I was running for Alder, there was one green, and that was me, in one of the 30 wards, and nothing else. But this year, we're going to have president, vice president. Justin Paglino is going to be candidate
for U.S. Senate,
for U.S. Congress, and
so I don't think we have anyone for Congress, but we have Justin for U.S. Senate against Chris Murphy.
Ah, yes. So Justin's running for the Congress.
And then, so, well,
And by the way, in case you're going to ask me that gotcha question, it's 435 representatives and 100 senators. I memorized that, so I could pass that off. But, we're going to have 4 candidates, including me, citywide in the whole New Haven ballot. And that, that's super important, because everyone sort of helps everyone else. And it's super important because we had to collect, so many signatures statewide, in a limited period of time to get Jill and Butch onto the ballot. But when you have a whole sort of ballot line like that, people say, oh my gosh, when did the Green Party show up? Because, a lot of them are first-time voters, or they may not have really known that we were there.
Right, and I don't know yet what position we'll be in.
Low.
Because,
as low as they can manage.
Well, no, we should be higher than RFK Jr.
I hope so.
But I don't know if we'll be higher or lower than like the Independent Party, or the Libertarians. The Libertarians will probably be higher than us because they had ballot access for president. But I don't know if we'll be 4 or 5. But people who know me, who listen to me a lot, I rant about our ballot design a lot because other than New York State and Connecticut, we're about the only ones that have that grid that still has not a physical party level, but a virtual party line.
Right.
And so people can say, you just have to vote row A.
And see, that's one of the structural things, as well as, kind of the fix being in for the Republican and the Democrat in the Registrar of Voters race, It's one of those many, many 150 structural things that these, entrenched sort of, single party rule, folks have put in place. The Democrats always get row A, and then they scream, vote row A, and, that shouldn't be. That's clearly unfair. And it's important because if you've ever voted, and I have a lot, it's a very confusing visual display, okay? And if you're always at the top, that's a structural advantage. There are places, I've heard and seen, where it's actually randomized. And
Washington, D.C. has a really good ballot. Yeah. Candidates are listed for each office, and each office is randomized in a different order. Right. And no one really has the advantage. But it's, the row A thing actually also hurts people. You were talking about people who want a primary within the party.
Correct.
Because those people challenging,
Yeah.
they're also row B, not
Yeah,
row A.
they get shoved way down. Yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
So I was going to ask, how can people get involved? You know, we talked quite a bit about the mechanics of making voting easier, but how can we make people feel like voting makes a difference?
Well,
and
First of all, you know, we're going to put this out, I know, on YouTube, and I'm going to see if I can get it on
Right.
the New Haven Access channel. But I think the YouTube's pretty important because, you know, then, you know, you'll see this message and hear this information. We have a Facebook page you just look for Paul Garlinghouse and you'll find me.
we'll put the link on the YouTube entry too.
Awesome. And, but the thing I would say most, if you're watching this before October 18th, go online, and if you think you're registered, check, and if it turns out you're not registered, get registered. Then you'll be able to vote in this election.
Yeah,
That's
no
the
election
first
day
thing.
surprises.
That's the first thing. If you miss it, if you're listening to this on the 19th, there are still ways to do it, and we'll put up on the Facebook page as well the process for how to do that. Okay, and that's something that, you know, people can look at, because that's something that I was able to do the last time I ran, was sort of give people information on, you know, social media about, you know, how does any of this stuff work, because it's pretty technical, and it's not, as I said, made all that convenient for folks. But it should be.
Yeah. And I guess I also kind of would like to give a couple of pitches. One, if you are one of the 40% who are not registered Democrat or Republican, now is the window of time that you could apply to become a justice of the peace in your town.
True.
And different towns have different numbers of openings. Some have only 3 or 4, some have 50 to 100. So I can't predict whether you would get it or not,
Right.
but it's just administrative. Your town clerk would have the application for it, and there are really no qualifications other than being an elector who is not a Democrat or a Republican.
Right, right. And that's the thing. You can marry people, and you can also, you know, certify people's
petition.
signatures and things
And I
like
think
that.
there's something about being able to deliver warrants or something. I've never had to face that. And it's too early to really think about this, but there is a group called the Citizens Election Audit that Luther Weeks runs. He has often been on the show right after elections. And you can volunteer to observe the election audits that check our tabulators.
Yes, yes.
And it is a really good way to, one, support election personnel like moderators and registrars, but also to learn a lot about how people vote.
And this is something, if you show up, I just want to say this, if you show up on the 5th and they try to turn you away, don't be turned away, okay? You need to sit there and you need to tell them, I'm registered, I know I'm registered, I voted in this town, I've lived here in this neighborhood, I know I should be on the list. If they've taken you off the list for whatever reason, innocently or otherwise, stand your ground and stand there until they let you vote. And, you know, if I'm there or some, you know, green person is watching, we'll jump in and try to help you get through that, because there are ways to cut through that bureaucracy, but you have to stand your ground. No one who knows they're registered should be turned away from voting if they're coming in person that day.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Well,
But you could always go downtown if you have time, but, you know, you shouldn't have to go downtown if you know you're a voter.
well, thank you, Paul, for driving all the way to Waterford.
Oh, it was a great drive, and thank you for having me.
And we'll put this up on YouTube,
Yeah.
and people can follow you on your campaign on Facebook.
Absolutely.
So we'll add on the link.
Okay.
And thanks a lot. Next.
Thank you.
And I think the next program we're going to have Justin Paglino,
Yay!
who is running for Senate
Yeah.
and also can give us updates on the Jill Stein Butchware campaign.
He knows a lot about that. He's a big fan of Jill.
Yes, and he even works for her. So we'll see you all next time. And
Very
thanks
good.
again, Paul.
Thank you. It's so good. So good. So good. All right.
try.